Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Justice Podcast. This is a show about technology, society, ethics, and everything in between. I'm Murat.
And I'm Jaden. This episode marks the beginning of our Tech Justice series on recommendation algorithms and misinformation.
This is Recommended Lies.
This will be a three-part series diving into the history of recommendation algorithms, their use today, and what solutions we can come to in the near future.
And in this first episode, we'll be introducing the technology of recommendation algorithms. We all know them, and we sometimes love them. I know for sure that I interact with recommendation algorithms at least 30 times a day.
Yeah, I love getting ad suggestions from my Amazon wishlist on Instagram.
But what exactly is a recommendation algorithm? I know that they automatically show you things on social media, and like you said, things on shopping websites, but how exactly do they work?
That's a great question. According to an article titled Scholarly Recommendation Systems, a Literature Survey, published in the Knowledge and Information Systems Journal, quote, a recommendation or recommender systems is a type of information filtering system that employs data mining and analytics of user behaviors, including preferences and activities, to filter information from a large information source, unquote, and deliver the tailored information to a user.
Well, that sounds pretty simple, actually. It's basically just taking a whole lot of information, both from the user and from the service, and then doing a bunch of math to decide what content to display to each user of that service.
So what is the history of recommendation algorithms? One of the earliest recommendation algorithms we found was created by a professor of computer science at UT Austin named Elaine Rich, and it sought to automate part of a librarian's job, recommending books. When you go to a library and ask the librarian for their recommendation on what books to read, they will usually ask you a few questions. What kind of genres are you interested in? What kind of books you have read before? And which ones did you like the best? What authors do you like? The librarian might also make a few assumptions about you to better tailor the recommendation. They might assume your age, your education level, your gender, your previous knowledge of the topic, among other things. After all, they wouldn't recommend a child the same reading material as an adult, or a girl the same as a boy.
What Elaine Rich created in 1979 was a computer program called Grundy. Its basic function was to ask its users the same types of questions a librarian would ask in an attempt to match users to a book. The key feature, or innovation, that Dr. Rich employed with Grundy was stereotypes, that she described as, quote, a collection of frequently occurring characteristics of users, unquote. Grundy would ask users to list as many single words to describe themselves as they could. We'll call this a user-defined personality trait. And then Grundy would develop a stereotype. These stereotypes would contain in them any number of related characteristics that the program thinks would be a logical extension of the user-defined traits. Within each stereotype, these characteristics would be ranked on a scale of -5 to +5, and the more positive a number, the more positively correlated the trait is with the personality. Like if a person describes themselves as athletic, the program would assign a very large positive value to a variable called thrill, and a large negative value to a variable called romance. In addition to this, each of these match stereotypes characteristics would also be assigned a certainty rating on a scale of 0 to 1000, which would indicate the degree of certainty to which an assumed characteristic matches a user-defined personality trait. Finally, with all the information both provided by the user and inferred about the user, Grundy would develop a user synopsis that is the basis for guiding the recommender system.
This was basically how Grundy made up for its lack of sight to make assumptions about the user. Additionally, by asking the user more questions, Grundy could modify existing stereotype values. Grundy, by design, had way more books in its catalog than any person would care to read synopses for. But by asking more questions and taking into account users' previous accepting or rejecting of book recommendations, it would work to narrow down the recommendation list to a few books.
So how did we get from a book recommendation system that explicitly asks you to list your interests and gives you a lot of control over the types of things you get recommended to the endless content mill of totally inferred data that we have today.
Well, by Rich's own admission, the main limitations of Grundy were internal things like memory capacity and processing power. As storage and computing technology have evolved and with the dawn of the internet, recommendation algorithms can now make better assumptions and stereotypes about users than ever before. Every time you visit a website, you leave a data trail of cookies which other sites can then purchase or receive and feed into their algorithm. These each make up small sections of a totally computer-generated user profile, and as you peruse the internet, you create more and more until the companies that have access to the cookie information have a very good idea of the type of person you are and what your interests are. Then when you arrive on a different website, you'll be suggested things from previous sites you visited or new websites that people of similar interest areas or demographics may have searched for.
And that's just one way that these recommendation algorithms have changed. When designing these algorithms, designers will often program them in ways that incentivize you to interact with the content you're shown and stay on the site longer. This is particularly important for social media sites, because the more you interact with something, the more likely you are to see an advertisement or make a purchase. Both ads and purchases are the things that make money for these tech companies that run the services. And in some ways, money is kind of the point of all of this. This gets into an idea of market fundamentalism shared by Jacob Metcalfe, which basically states that in an economy that incentivizes profit generation over everything else, businesses will naturally forgo implementing better, safer, and more ethical user experiences if those decisions impact the business's ability to generate revenue.
Exactly. And a good example of this in relation to recommendation algorithms is how they will often prioritize showing you content that is emotionally charged, sensationalized, or novel, over showing you things that might be considered boring because that type of content keeps people engaged.
Yep. And I think that there isn't anything more symptomatic of this value than the plague of misinformation that has emerged in the last decade. In the next episode, we'll take a closer look at the misinformation landscape to find out to what degree fake news and conspiracy theories have been perpetuated by these recommendation systems. What we find out may surprise you.
This podcast was created by Murat Aja and Jane Yeager for their Tech Justice class.
If you like what you hear, please consider supporting us on Patreon for just a few bucks. You'll get access to nothing, but I'd really appreciate the free money.
This podcast was edited by Jaden and Murat.
And it was written and produced by Murat and Jaden.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and you'll hear us again in the next one.